Okay, hi everybody. Good. Okay, well, let's just do a couple of minutes meditation on the breath. So now let's generate bodhicitta motivation for this evening session. Think the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. Reaching enlightenment depends on completing the entire graduated path to enlightenment. And that depends on studying, thinking about, meditating on the path to enlightenment. Lama Tsongkhapa's short text, The Foundation of All Good Qualities, explains the entire path to enlightenment. So I'm going to participate in tonight's class on the foundation of all good qualities in order to reach enlightenment, in order to enlighten all sentient beings. So, if we can all generate that motivation and all be on the same page with respect to motivation, that'd be very harmonious and in harmony with the purpose of Kurukulla Center and in harmony with the purpose of Lama Tsongkhapa writing this text and Kurukulla Lama Rinpoche giving the commentary on the text, which is what we're looking at here. Okay, so thanks for being here. And last week we were talking about the second verse. It seems we've been stuck on that for a couple of weeks. Well, I don't know about stuck, but considering it for a couple of weeks. So I think we'll probably just move on. Understanding that the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once is greatly meaningful, difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate the mind that unceasingly day and night takes its essence. That's the second verse. So, it's about the perfect human rebirth, the 8 freedoms, 10 richnesses, how it's meaningful in 3 ways, for temporal benefit, ultimate benefit, and benefit every moment, and that it's hard to receive because it's hard to create the cause, and as I say, it's very rare, which we looked at by considering the numbers and so forth. So the next verse tells us, this Kurukulla Lama Rinpoche says, the next verse tells us that the perfect human rebirth is not only difficult to find, but also decays very quickly, like a water bubble. So here, so when we think of the outline of the fourth main outline of the Lam-Rim, how the disciples are led along the path, then we divide that into 2, developing guru devotion, which is the root of the path, and then what to do after having developed guru devotion, and then that's also divided into 2, which the first part is recognizing and persuading ourselves to extract the essence from our perfect human rebirth, and that we do by seeing how it's all the opportunities that perfect human rebirth gives us, and how rare it is to find this precious human rebirth, so that once we've got it, we really should take full advantage of it. And then, so having exhorted ourselves to extract the essence from the perfect human rebirth, how do we extract the essence? So that brings us then to these three paths: the path of the lower capable being, the path of the middle capable being, the path of the greater capable being, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche translates the Tibetan terms for those three levels of path. And more common translation is scope, lower scope, middle scope, great scope. So the first thing we do is look at the lower scope as, if you're thinking of a three-story building, then to get to the top floor, you have to go into the first floor, and then you have to go to the second floor, and then you go to the third floor. So even though our goal is enlightenment, which means following the path of the greater capable being, in order to get there, we have to traverse the two lower paths first and build on them through study and meditation, because the way Atisha arranged the graduated path, it's kind of psychologically logical that one step naturally leads to the next. So we can't really skip any of the steps. So the first step on the way is, of the lower capable being's path, is that even though we found this precious, perfect human rebirth that has all its opportunities, is very hard to find, will be difficult to find again. Even though we've got it now in our hand, it's decaying, it's finishing very quickly. So, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, this life is as impermanent as a water bubble. So, look at it, the water bubbles on a creek or a stream, they just float on the surface and they pop and they disappear. So that's how fragile this life is. Impermanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just like a shadow follows the body, the results of negative and positive karma ensue. So then Rinpoche's brief commentary there is, death is certain, but when it will arrive is not. So if you're familiar with the 9-round death meditation, the 9-round has 3 major headings, and there are 3 subheadings in each of those 3 major headings. So, the 3 major headings are: death is definite, or death is certain; the time of death is uncertain; and what helps at the time of death. So when we meditate on impermanence and death, that's generally the outline we follow. One thing that's for sure is that we are not going to live for 100 years. 100 years from now, pretty much everybody alive today will be dead. It's very important to remember impermanence. The Kadampa Geshis used to remember impermanence all the time. And in order to avoid seeking the comfort of temporal life, they used to remember impermanence all the time in order to avoid seeking the comfort of the temporal life, of this life. They felt that if they didn't bring it to mind in the morning, they were in danger of wasting the entire afternoon. And if they didn't bring it to mind in the afternoon, they were in danger of wasting the whole night. By constantly keeping impermanence in mind, they were able to prevent the meaningless thought seeking only the comfort of this life from arising. So attachment. Attachment is really the big enemy. Attachment to the happiness and comfort of just this life. After death, our mind doesn't come to a complete stop, like water drying up or a flame going out. There's continuity. Just as wherever the body goes, the shadow comes along with it. Similarly, wherever our mind goes, our karma comes along too. You must have unshakably firm belief in this. So that's why in the verse, the first two lines are about impermanence of this life, and how quickly our life decays and death comes, and then after death, just like a shadow follows a body, what we take with us, we can't take our family, we can't take our friends, we can't take our possessions, we can't even take our most cherished body, the thing that we've valued most in our life, the thing that we've worked the hardest for to preserve and keep safe and so forth. Even that has to be left behind the body. So only the mind goes on. What's the Tibetan saying? Like a hair pulled out of butter. So, if we found hairs in our butter, we'd be suing Stop and Shop, hoping to get like $1 million or something. But in Tibet, people made butter at home, and it was made from yak's milk. Actually, I think we talk about yak cheese and yak milk and so on. Yak is actually the male of the species. The females, I think, are called zo. So they're the ones that actually give the milk. But anyway, yak is like generic, mankind. So it's yak kind. So when they're milking the yaks, a few of the yak black hairs fall into the milk, or they get caught up in the process, and sometimes they finish up in the butter. So when you find a hair, you pull it out, and it comes out without a trace of butter on it. So like that, our consciousness leaves our body, without an atom of matter coming with it. So that's how, and all that comes along is, the positively negative karma that we've created in this life and in all our beginningless previous lives. Whatever karma hasn't ripened, whatever karma we haven't destroyed, positive karma we haven't destroyed through anger or wrong views, whatever negative karma we haven't purified through purification practices or experience, that all comes along. Okay, so I won't, the topic of impermanence and death is really quite a big one. It's a, whole course in itself. So we'll just keep going at this point. With respect to karma, there are 10 non-virtuous actions and 10 virtuous ones. We must avoid the former and practice the latter. So finding firm and definite conviction in this, that the results of positive and negative karma, or the karmic imprints that in our consciousness continue into the next life, being aware of that, finding firm and definite conviction in this, that when we do positive actions, we leave positive imprints on our consciousness that ripen into good rebirths and happiness. And when we create negative actions, those negative imprints ripen into suffering and rebirth in the lower realms. So, finding firm and definite conviction in that. Please bless me always to be careful to abandon even the slightest of negativities and to accomplish only virtuous deeds. In other words, as Kurukulla says, please bless me always to be careful in the practice of avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions and observing the 10 virtuous ones. So I think, we all know what they are, those different, those 10 actions, and 3 non-virtuous actions of body, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, the 4 non-virtuous actions of speech, lying, slandering, speaking harshly and gossiping, and 3 non-virtuous actions of mind, covetousness, ill will, and wrong views. And so the 10 virtuous actions are just the opposite: non-killing, non-stealing, non-sexual misconduct, and so forth. So obviously there are a lot more negative and positive actions than those, but that's just they're kind of common ones that give us a start in our practice of abandoning non-virtue and practicing virtue. Of course, positive and negative actions aren't actually defined by the action itself. I think it was last week we talked about, with the body, if you had the Bodhisattva vows, one of the vows is that you have to create one of those 7 non-virtuous actions of body and speech if it's clear that it's going to be of benefit to another sentient being or other sentient beings. So as the example, I quote, it was Lama Yeshe used to say that someone's trying to kill him with a knife, and he runs and hides in your house. And then the person comes to your door and says, where's Tibetan Yeshe? I want to kill him. And you're allowed to lie and say, oh, I haven't seen him, or something like that. That protects Lama Yeshe, and it protects that person from creating the karma of killing, completing the karma of killing. He's probably created some negative karma with the intention to kill, but because there's no object for him to kill Lama Yeshe, then he doesn't create the complete action, so that doesn't become a throwing karma because it's incomplete in the 4 branches. So, whether an action is positive or negative depends more on motivation for doing the action and also the effect of the action. Those are the 2 main things that determine whether an action is positive or negative. But since we beginners don't really have the insight to understand exactly how our mind works, and even the ability to be brutally honest with ourselves and look at our deepest motivations, since we can't really tell what our motivation for an action is, just the idea to do it comes and we just do it. So at least by outlining those 10 actions, which are, all other things being equal, that they be negative, in most cases, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and so forth are negative. So it helps us begin to develop our practice of, ethics or discipline, morality. So, the practice of morality is the very first practice we should do as new Buddhists. Well, as any Buddhist. Okay. And so also he's alluding to karma, the abandon even the slightest of negativities. So that sort of refers to the fact, one of the four attributes of karma, that karma is definite, that is, positive karma always brings the result of happiness, and negative karma always brings the result of suffering. So that's the first outline. The second is that karma is expandable. So that's why saying even small negativity, if left unpurified, kind of festers in our mind and gains strength. In Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, I think Pabonka Rinpoche gives the example of, killing a mosquito or an insect is it's a heavy enough karma. Killing, it's kind of the first thing we shouldn't do, take the life of another sentient being. But if that's left unpurified, in a couple of weeks, it has multiplied or expanded in weight, so that it's, in a couple of weeks it's equivalent to having killed a human being, which is much heavier than killing an insect because of the power of the object. So it matters, karmically speaking, it matters who or what we kill. The worst is to kill our guru or a bodhisattva, an arhat, our parents, other human beings, and then also it's heavier to kill like an elephant as opposed to a mouse. Very easy to kill a mouse, but it takes a lot of effort to kill an elephant. You have to really exert yourself, and I don't even know how you go about it. You can shoot it, I guess, but maybe if you're shooting, it'd be harder to kill a mouse because it's a smaller target, but I'm not sure that's how it works. The amount of effort you have to put in matters, and the potential of the object that you're killing also is important. Also, how you go about it. If you poison a sentient being, that doesn't take much effort. If you strangle a large animal with your bare hands, that takes more effort. So, there's just all these different factors that determine how heavy the karma of killing is. And same with the other negative actions. So karma is expandable, so a small action, and when the Buddha, there's a story of when the Buddha was going on an alms round one day, a small girl, offered a small coin into his begging bowl. And then the Buddha, as he sometimes did, made a prediction that as a result of that action, that she would be born a universal emperor or some incredible result like that. And one of the Buddha's, I think his cousin, Legpe karma, there's or Devadatta. One relative who was always around the Buddha and was always criticizing him and always thought he wasn't who other people thought he was and just thought he was a liar and so on. He said, why are you flattering that girl like that? She just gave you a small coin. Why are you lying about this huge result she's going to get? So then the Buddha pointed to a huge banyan tree. You know those banyan trees that they grow out, they grow really huge. And, you know, whole villages, people from a whole village could get under them for meetings or, and he pointed to a tree that was so big that it could carry 150 chariots or something. And he said, see that tree, that grew from a tiny seed this big. So like, as that tree can come from this tiny seed, so karma is like that, expandable like that. So, so that's the second outline, karma is expandable. So, you know, no small negativity is too small to avoid, and no positive action is too small to create. So whenever we have the chance to do any positive action, we should take it, rather than thinking, oh, well, it doesn't matter, it's not that big a deal, you know. So the third outline of karma is that we can't experience the result if we haven't created the karma. You know, you can't experience the result of a karma you haven't created. And the fourth one is that if we have created a karma, the result will eventually ripen. The result, you know, it never just fizzles out or fades away in time, you know. Even if it can take 1 billion years, if it hasn't been experienced, if that seed hasn't ripened, if we haven't purified that karma, if it's a negative karma, then it will definitely ripen. It doesn't just kind of go away because it happened a long time ago, or it was very small. So those are the four general outlines about karma. So the next verse tells us that no matter how much we enjoy samsaric pleasures, there's no way to find satisfaction in them. So seeking samsaric pleasures is the door to all suffering. They are uncertain and cannot be relied upon. Recognizing these shortcomings, please bless me to generate the strong wish for the bliss of liberation. So, so here, the previous verse was on the path of the lower capable being. So, you know, since this is such a short you know, prayer, Lamrim prayer, you can't, so he didn't put every step in, obviously. So in the lower, in the path of the lower capable being, there's impermanence and death. And then the next teaching in the more extensive Lamrim then is on the 3 lower realms. So the so we meditate on the perfect human rebirth, rare and precious and very hard to get again, but it's not going to last. It's finishing quickly all the time. And when the time of death comes, there's only 2 ways we can go. We can be reborn in the upper realms, or we can be reborn in the lower realms. So that's determined, obviously, by karma. So at the time of death, so we've been creating negative and positive karma since beginningless time, but most of the time, by far most of the time, we create negative karma, as a human being, as an animal, in the other realms, because the only way we can create positive karma is by practicing Dharma. And the opportunity, as we've already seen, is the opportunity to practice Dharma is, in the teaching on the perfect human rebirth, we saw that it's very rarely that we get the opportunity to practice Dharma.
Hello?
Yeah.
I had a question. So, so would it be accurate to say that, like, say you had someone who wasn't a Dharma follower or a Buddhist, but, did a great deal of good things in their lifetime, like a civil rights movement leader or someone that like helped, the poor or a charity organization or something along those lines, that did a great deal of good in the world. If they didn't do that with Dharma motivation, that doesn't generate any positive karma, even if they were doing it in an altruistic sort of manner?
Well, as I said, the motivation is the main thing, but also the effect of the action has some bearing on it. So if you're bringing happiness to others, or if you're doing something even, with sincere concern for the welfare of others, and, without wanting money or fame, or even, making anonymous donations, or, it's possible, but mainly it's difficult to for most people to not be doing it, expecting some benefit in this life. I mean, the main definition of creating positive karma is done not to experience benefit in this life, but to get a better future rebirth in cyclic existence, to avoid being reborn in the lower realms, or to attain liberation or enlightenment. So those are obviously more distant goals. So the hardline view, I think, is kind of very difficult. But I've heard Lama Zopa Rinpoche and His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other lamas say that if someone is really doing things to benefit others, like those things you said, then there is positive karma created, but it may not be strong enough to result in a positive rebirth, just because for something to become a throwing karma, the action has to be complete in the four branches of motivation, object, action, and completion of the action. And so generally, motivation has to be done to bring benefit in a future life, not in this life. But the other view is, well, if it's not done out of attachment, which is just selfishly seeking the comfort of this life, then perhaps that motivation is positive enough for the action to become a throwing karma. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, like you said, I think the key thing is definitely the motivation, because one could do something that seems like an altruistic action, but they still want some sense of pride or recognition from others for being selfless or appearing selfless, even though you know, take a great deal of pride in doing that. I'm reading Words of My Perfect Teacher by Patrul Rinpoche right now, and he also emphasizes not letting positive karma get destroyed by the four circumstances, which are just what is this? Regret, anger. There's two others, I think, but
Wrong views. Did you say wrong views?
No, I'm flubbing it right now. I memorized them and then I forgot them in the moment. I know it was anger, regretting doing the positive action, boasting about boasting was another one, boasting about the positive action, and there's a fourth one I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to read again.
Well, the wrong view that generally is that, you know, the belief that there's no karma, there's no past and future lives. That sort of, you know, the 10th of the 10 non-virtues, the third mental one of covetousness, ill will, and then wrong views, such as, you know, there's no past and future lives. You know, views that are opposite to reality. There's no such thing as karma. There's no good karma, bad karma, things like that. Someone generating that kind of wrong view would destroy any positive karma that had been created that hadn't been dedicated.
Yes. Oh, so I just remembered it. It was not dedicating the action, or not properly dedicating it with bodhicitta.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily destroy it, but it leaves it susceptible to destruction. He doesn't say wrong views?
No, I think, or I guess specifically what he was talking about was four circumstances that can either destroy or prevent positive karma from, you know, becoming a throwing karma, which is, you know, boasting, regret, not dedicating, and anger. Yeah, well,
regret may not destroy it, but it would certainly weaken it, just as rejoicing increases the merit, you know. What was I saying just before that? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Okay. Well, let's just keep going. Something I wanted to say, but I can't remember. Anyway, the next verse says, no matter how much we enjoy samsaric pleasures, there's no way to find satisfaction in them. Seeking samsaric pleasures is the door to all suffering. They are uncertain and cannot be relied upon. Recognizing these shortcomings, please bless me to generate the strong wish for the bliss of liberation. So that's the verse, Lama Tsongkhapa's verse. Kurukulla Lama Rinpoche says, whatever beautiful objects we see, we're never satisfied. Whatever pleasant sounds we hear, we're never satisfied. It's the same with all other objects of the senses. No matter how much television we watch or movies we see, we'll never be satisfied. This is how it is. And all samsaric pleasures are the door to samsaric suffering. No matter how many samsaric pleasures there are, they are of no value. All past great meditators and holy beings have recognized temporal pleasure as a shortcoming of samsara, as faulty, deceptive. They have never seen samsaric pleasures as valuable or good. So I know I was saying that in the path of the lower capable being, you know, after we've meditated on perfect human rebirth, and then we meditate on impermanence and death, you know, different ways of meditating on that, like the 9-round death meditation, and and then also the other meditation on the circumstances of death, like imagining. So I think they call it esoteric and exoteric meditation. So the external one, sort of lying on your bed and actually imagining, now I'm dying. And as convincingly as you can, try to feel that you're really dying, see how you feel, see where your mind goes. So are we ready or not? So that's one way of meditating on death, to get a feeling for its reality and imminence, actually. And the esoteric way is by meditating on the internal experience of death. So I don't know if you've studied those teachings with the 25 course objects, with the senses withdrawing, and then the experiences of the mind withdrawing from the sense objects, and then gradually coming to the heart chakra. There are these 25 different things that happen there, and there are eight stages of losing the five senses in the first four, and then there are white vision, red vision, the dark vision, and then the clear light vision. So these are, you familiar with these, everybody? Heard of it? Anyway. So that's another way of meditating. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama said that he is kind of rehearsing for death. This is what our experience is going to be. Should we have a death that's not sudden or traumatic, from old age or illness, sort of more gradual illness, something that isn't too severe. If our karma is good enough, then we're more likely to have a gradual, gentle death. And one, if we've done these meditations enough in life, then and become familiar with the inner aspects of the death process, sort of like rehearsing our death, then when it actually happens, we'll be very familiar with what's going on. We won't be afraid, and we'll even be able to tell ourselves what's coming next. Oh, now I'm having the white vision, next will be the red vision, then the dark vision, and so on. As our consciousness gradually absorbs into the heart chakra. So His Holiness said, he usually does it like 8 times a day. It's, if you're doing tantric, highest yoga tantra sadhanas or practices as a daily commitment, and you have a bunch of different ones to do, different sadhanas, Haruka, Yamantaka, Kala Chakra, whatever, I don't know what commitments His Holiness has, but if you do the well, especially if you do the long sadhana, these practices tend to have quite a long sadhana, which can, if you do it slowly with a lot of meditation, can take an hour or two, or they have very short sadhanas, which you can, rattle through in a few minutes. But obviously, it's better that if we're doing these practices, to meditate during them, and at a certain point during the meditation, where we meditate on emptiness and then arise as the meditational deity, we go through, at that point, you go through these 8 different stages of the death process. in meditation. So, and the point is to be ready. I mean, what the yogis aim to do is to control their mind at the time of death so they can direct their next rebirth. So if you're very familiar with the death process, what you're really waiting for, the moment you're waiting for, is the clear light of death, which is actually when the consciousness leaves the body. And we all experience it, but none of, we don't recognize it because we don't know what's going on. We're completely confused and probably afraid, or and all sorts of negative karmas coming up, and strange visions and fears and so on. And especially if we're in a room surrounded by weeping and wailing relatives and that, it's very hard to control your mind at the time of death, even in the best of circumstances. So the yogis, they practice the death process, and when waiting for the clear light of death to manifest, and that is so in Tantra, generally we talked about primary and secondary consciousnesses when we're talking like from philosophical teachings. The 6 primary consciousnesses of sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch, and the 6th, the mental consciousness, primary consciousness, and then we talk about the mental factors, the 51 mental factors. So that's kind of the sutra description of the mind. In Tantra, we talk about the gross consciousness, subtle, and the most subtle levels of mind. And it's the most subtle consciousness that goes from life to life. The gross and the subtle finish with this life. So it's the most subtle consciousness that goes to the next life, carrying with it all the beginningless karmic imprints that are still there. So the clear light of death is the most subtle or the most refined level of mind that we have in life, and they try to seize that, halt the process there, and use the most subtle level of mind to meditate on emptiness. That meditating with that most refined level of mind on emptiness gives us the best chance of having realizations of emptiness without the gross or subtle obscurations hindering it. So so you'll see these stories of these lamas who remain in, they call it tukdam, in the meditation at the time of death for a few days or even a few weeks. And this was common enough in Tibet. In India, when Tibetan lamas, the refugee lamas, some of them manifested this meditation at the time of death, the Indian doctors were very surprised because of the hot climate, especially, things decay and rot very quickly and start to stink, But the room where these lamas were meditating in the clear light of death for a few days or a couple of weeks, whatever, not only did the room not smell of dead body, but actually it had a sweet smell. It's called the smell of morality. So these are people whose minds were very pure and who were accomplished meditators and were able to meditate in the clear light of death, and then wait for, and then choose their rebirth where they saw it would be a good situation to be born in, parents who were sincere Dharma practitioners, or, maybe in a place where their disciples were, so they can come back to continue guiding their disciples in the next life. So we see that as incarnate lamas. Or they could choose to then be reborn in a Pure Land, But many of the lamas would come back to continue teaching their disciples if their disciples still had, or enough of them had, still had a good relationship with their teacher at the time of the teacher's death. But for us, it's not like that. We're not. We're completely under the control of karma. So at the time of death, the craving and grasping, those two of the 12 links of dependent origination, they condition the seed of the next rebirth, or the karmic seed of the next rebirth. And since nearly all of our life, we've not had the opportunity to practice Dharma. That's where the question came, right? And most of the time, we've just created negative karma. I mean, just the preponderance. If you compare how much negative karma we've got in our mind and how much positive karma, just on probabilities alone, it's almost impossible that positive karma would ripen and bring us into a human rebirth, or rebirth as one of those in one of the God realms. So as we think about, this, we've had this perfect human rebirth. We've wasted most of it. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. If death were to come now, 100% I'm going to be reborn in the lower realms. So we should feel that. And then what are the lower realms? So then, the way the Lama Rim set up, then there's the teachings on the hell realms, hungry ghost realm, the animal realms, detailing all the incredible sufferings of those realms. So, as I said before last time, when we meditate, we don't meditate as if we're watching other people going through that. We put ourselves in that situation, and we've been in that situation, in each of those situations, countless times. We just don't remember. But through listening and thinking about the teachings, and then meditating on try to have the experience of being in the hell realms, the hungry ghost realm, the animal, what a terrible experience it is. And we should generate a strong, positive fear of that kind of rebirth, because it's just unimaginable suffering for ourselves, and we create just more suffering for others, and certainly we can't help others at all if we're reborn in the lower realms. So, it should be avoided at all costs. So when we see what danger we're in, we have this perfect human rebirth, we've squandered it, mostly created negative karma, very unlikely we'd be reborn in the upper realms if we were to die now. How terrible the suffering of the lower realms is. What can I do? So then the next teaching in the Lama Rim is teaching on refuge. So in the teaching on refuge, the incredible good qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are explained to show that they are really worth the objects of refuge for us, who are seeking at least not to be reborn in the lower realms, having meditated so intensively on them and understanding how terrible it would be to be born there. So, there are 2 or 3 causes for taking refuge. One is this fear of, at least fear of suffering of the lower realms. As we go onto the path of the middle capable being, we also see that we should be afraid of being reborn in the upper realms too. We should be afraid of being reborn anywhere in cyclic existence, just because, it's all one big prison. The upper bit is better than the lower bit, but that doesn't last either. It's all in the grip of impermanence and change. So even though, like this life, here we are in the upper realms as a human being, but it's nearly over. And if we look at how much negative karma we've created and how much positive karma created, we see the chances are much stronger we'll be reborn in the lower realms. So that fear of that lower realms should cause us to take refuge, as should fear of being reborn in the upper realms. So fear of all of cyclic existence leads us to go to refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, as the only way out. So fear of cyclic existence, fear of suffering, pushes us to take refuge, and full confidence, faith and confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha to save us is another cause for taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So the teachings in the Lam Rim go into great detail on about why the Buddha, why the Dharma, why the Sangha are worthy objects of refuge. And the Mahayana way of taking refuge, called the third cause, is not just me. All sentient beings, all samsaric sentient beings are in this situation of, being in the grip of the Lord of Death, of impermanence and death, and the risk of being reborn in the lower realms with unendurable suffering there for eons and eons. So, I take refuge not just for my own sake, but for the sake of all sentient beings, to become a Buddha, to become enlightened in order to free all sentient beings. So Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha have the ability, have the potential to lead me to enlightenment. So I take refuge. That's taking the Mahayana refuge, taking refuge in order to free all sentient beings from cyclic existence, lead them to enlightenment. So then once we take refuge, then what our first obligation, our main obligation, is to follow the law of karma, to stop creating any more negative karma, to purify the negative karma we've already created, to create positive karma, to enhance any good qualities, positive qualities we have, and to acquire and enhance any good qualities that we haven't yet acquired. So then after refuge, the next teaching is on karma. So if we follow karma, if we study and follow karma, you're familiar with Geshe Zopa's book on karma, on the steps of the path? Hang on. Not so easy jumping up and down as it used to be, I can tell you that. So you're familiar with this series of books? These are Geshe Lundub Zopa's commentaries on Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo. So there's 3 volumes of this, the root text, and there are 5 volumes of Geshe Zopa's teachings. He began, I think possibly at Lama Yeshe's request or suggestion back in when Lama was in Madison. Geshe Zopa was Lama Yeshe's teacher in Tibet, at Sera Monastery in Tibet, and they fled Tibet. Geshe Zopa's biography, or is it his autobiography? It's called Like a Waking Dream. He talks about his life there. So Lama Yeshe was Geshe Zopa's student in Lhasa at Sera Monastery in Tibet. And also one of the students was Jumpa Tinley, one of Lama Yeshe's best friends. But he disrobed when he came to Tibet, and he's the father of Yangtze Rinpoche, who's the president of Maitripa College in Portland. And he was Yangtze Rinpoche is also very close to Geshe Zopa. So when they left Tibet, a lot of these monks finished up in the refugee camp in northeast India, in Baksadwa, and but then His Holiness sent Geshe Zopa to America in 1962 with a couple of young lamas, incarnate lamas, for them to. He was kind of, I think, as their chaperone, and they were sent here to study English. And they became the first interpreters, Sharpa Tulku and Kamlung Tulku. They were the first interpreters at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives in Dharamsala, which His Holiness set up with Geshe Ngawandage as the main teacher to teach Buddhism to Westerners. Well, to Indians too, but Indians didn't really come. So then the young lamas went back to India after some time. Geshe Zopa stayed on, and he became professor of Southeast Asian Studies or something or other at University of Madison, University of Wisconsin in Madison. And Yeshe Lama Zopa Rinpoche visited him on their first visit to the States in 74 and again in 75. I was with them in 75. And, as a university professor, Geshe-la had to be a little careful about teaching Buddhism to would-be practitioners. But Lama sent a lot of his students who'd been to Kopan in Nepal to Geshe Zopa. So eventually they did form a Dharma center in the mid-70s in Madison called Deer Park. And he started giving, I think, maybe weekly teachings on Lamrim Chenmo, and over many years, 85, 95, over a 20 or 30 year period, I think. And then these teachings were collected into this 5-volume series, and volume 2 is on karma. So, this is far and away the most extensive book dealing with karma that's out there, I think, in English. So, those if you want to become expert in karma, know all about karma, This is the book. So once we take refuge, our obligation then is to follow the law of karma. And so as a practical matter, when you take refuge in the refuge ceremony, and sort of technically become a Buddhist through having taken refuge, based on the fear of samsara and the full confidence in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to guide. The main obligation is not to kill, or not even not to harm other sentient beings. That's kind of the bottom line of Buddhist practice. His Holiness goes a little further and says, if you can't, the bottom line of Buddhism is, if you can't help others, at least don't harm them. So the best thing is to help sentient beings on the basis of not harming. But if helping on the basis of not harming is too much for us to manage, then at least we should not harm others. And the worst harm is considered to be killing. So, so that's absolutely, to be avoided. And then when the Lamas used to give refuge, and I think, I don't know, Bob, does Geshe-la still do it? When you give refuge and then you give the 5 precepts as part of the same deal, or?
I think Geshe-la usually does it, offers them maybe afterwards, but separately, because people don't always take all of them, or maybe take some of them.
Right. So in Nepal, it used to be Lamas would give refuge, and then for those who wanted to give 5 precepts in the following ceremony. So people who didn't want to take precepts, they left the room, and then the rest carried on. But it can be done 2 separate times as well, obviously. And then 5 precepts, you take 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Generally, I think most people took 5. Not to kill, not to steal, not to engage in sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to use intoxicants. So that's the path of the lower capable being. So that, and if we follow those precepts, if we keep our precepts very, very well, and don't break them, and if we do break them, we purify the break as soon as we've noticed, then we can avoid being reborn in the lower realms. So that's the goal of the path. That's the goal of the lower capable being. That's what the practitioner of least ability is able to do, is to avoid rebirth in the lower realms. But then as we say, that's being reborn in the upper realms isn't a big solution either, because it's so tenuous. It's very easy to die, very easy to get sucked into the pleasures of samsara, as Kurukulla Lama says, and so very easy to use up our good karma and not create much more, and so at the end of that life, then again get reborn in the lower realms. So, so the next verse tells us, no matter how much we enjoy samsaric pleasures, there's no way to find satisfaction in them. So it's hard, really. I mean, everything's so tempting, you know. And when we're living in this kind of materialistic society, you know, bombarded with advertisements for all kinds of wonderful sense objects, you know, animate and inanimate, it can be hard to resist because, you know, the habit is so deeply, our habits are so deeply ingrained. I mean, even, you know, it's hard to kick a 20-year habit of smoking tobacco, for example. So how much harder is it going to be to kick a habit that has no beginning? You know, countless lives, habits of trying to enjoy sense objects, you know, whether it's food or drink or, you know, pleasant company or nice sounds or beautiful things to look at, you know. And, you know, this is partly why monasteries were created, you know, and you know, I certainly experienced the benefit of being in a place where there are very few of these kind of sense objects. You know, it became clear to me fairly early in the piece that, you know, having decided I wanted to put my life into the Dharma and, you know, not go back to Australia, not go back to practicing medicine, but I really wanted to you know, it's so laughable when I say it now. I wanted to practice Dharma my whole life. I mean, when I look back and see how little I practiced, but I'm laughing at myself. But that was my wish, you know. And I think I told you that I asked the Canadian nun at my first meditation course, Anne McNeil, I told her, I think I want to do Dharma, but I don't have a lot of money behind me, and how would I support myself? And she said, oh, you know, if you give yourself to the Dharma will always look after you. So, you know, I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. And, you know, so far, so good, I guess. I don't know how much I've given myself to Dharma, but, you know, still going. And, you know, haven't done an honest day's work in nearly 5 decades. So definitely got something to be said for it. So pretty soon after that, I realized the best way to practice Dharma, the sort of professional way, is to become a monk. So after a year and a bit, I got ordained as a monk, and that was great. You know, I was we were living at a monastery, and over the next year or two, there are about 25 Western monks and nuns, and you know, we lived together in a little Western monastic enclave at Kopan Monastery in Nepal, and we followed sort of, you know, our slightly slack monastic discipline. You know, get up in the morning, we did puja together for an hour and a half, and then we had a shared kitchen, and then 2 of us would take turns in being the cooks for a day. So there, you know, every couple of weeks you're in the kitchen, and you know, you're cooking for your Dharma brothers and sisters. It was nice. And so then we had breakfast, would be served at the end or during the puja in the morning, and then we had sometimes we had teachings in the morning, or people did individual study, or people did other stuff they were doing. I was already doing editing and publishing stuff at that time. and then we have lunch, and then we're quite strict. We didn't eat in the evening, as monks and nuns are supposed not to do. And so anyway, the day, then we got together at lunchtime. We did a Vajrasattva practice before lunch, and then we had lunch, and then people again did their various jobs or study, or we did some memorization and stuff like that in the afternoons. Then we'd make afternoon tea, and then people would go and meditate or whatever in the evening, and that was the day. So, study, meditate, whatever. So that was good while it lasted. A couple of years, I guess. But eventually we were 2 or 3 years, but then the Nepalese government changed the visa laws so that foreigners could only stay for the maximum you could get was 3-month visa. Before that, 1 year I got a 12-month visa, which was possible to get at that time. But then not only could you only stay for 3 months, but every month you had to change, I think $100, $150 a month, which was a lot of money for us. We were living on less than $50 a month at the monastery. You had to change it in the bank. You couldn't even change it in the black market. You had to go and show them your receipt to renew your 1-month visa. And after 3 months, you couldn't get another renewal. You had to leave the country. So we battled nicely with them for the home ministry for a few months, trying to get exception for the monks and nuns who were trying to do serious study and practice at the Kopan monastery. But it didn't work. So then we all had to traipse off to Dharamsala. And then it was, in 76. And by that time, the Lamas had made 3 trips to the West, and people were running out of money. And there were these new Dharma centers starting, and they needed cheap labor. And the monks and nuns needed somewhere to go where they'd be looked after. So a lot of us went to different centers around the world. And so that's kind of how the FPMT centers got started. We went there. Some of the monks and nuns went there as center director or as SPC or as resident teachers, different jobs, depending on the person. So all that time in Nepal, we're living together. It was very easy well, not easy, but it was relatively easy to maintain the discipline because we weren't surrounded with all these, beautiful sense objects. But then in my case, in 77, Lama Yeshe sent me to New Delhi to start a meditation center. And that was different from the way most of the centers started. Most of the centers started when the Lamas traveled. So they went to Australia, New Zealand, America, England, Italy, different places. And to give courses, invited by students who'd been to Kopan. And then sometimes the students said, look, we'd like to start a center. We've got this house or someone's giving some land or whatever. And sometimes Lama Yeshe would say yes. Sometimes he'd say, wait, maybe not, So anyway, the centers started happening like that at the students' request. But in Delhi, we didn't have any, we had one student who wasn't particularly serious Dharma student. She liked the Lamas and wanted to help, but she wasn't really a practitioner herself. Upper middle class Indian lady who we'd met in Dharamsala. So she offered to help. So then I stayed with friends, a Swiss couple who were had a clothing business. They had a shop in Geneva, and they had a house in Delhi, and they were students of the Lamas. They'd been to Copan, and they'd invited the Lamas to Switzerland in 75. And they had this house in Delhi. So I stayed there. But then you live with lay people, and there are no other monks or nuns around, so gradually, your discipline slips. And because, old habits are just not very far below the surface, then, all kinds of minds come up. But still, I was wearing my robes, and in India, people understand what it is to be a monk or nun. So it wasn't that bad. But, the rot began to set in, kind of thinking as a lay person instead of as a monk. And then, and I said, kind of mentioned this to Lama Zopa Rinpoche one time when he was in Delhi, and I was hanging out with him, and and he just said, well, it's the environment, so okay, the environment, but but it's true. There are there are 6 factors that cause delusions to arise. And one of those factors is the object, the sense objects. So because we have a long history of dealing with certain objects, food, clothing, music, people, we have had these deeply ingrained habits of dealing with these different objects in a particular way. So it's when you're confronted with the object and your mind isn't strong, then it's easy for these delusions to rise, to see things which are neither good nor bad in themselves, but to see certain things as good and certain things as bad, and to be attracted to certain things. In my case, women. So, to put it bluntly, and anyway, but that was sort of okay for a few years. But then in '83, Lama sent me to London to take over Wisdom Publications, and in London, it was a very different scene. I didn't wear robes, and people, if you wore your robes in London, people would shout, Hare Krishna at you, and sort of heckle you on the streets. And people had the experience of being spat on. So it was like, how strong are you? So, but, I was there to try and establish and run a business. So I started not wearing robes. I even bought a pinstripe suit. Actually, I had it made in Singapore. It was quite cheap. And, but you're dealing with banks and realtors and in central London. So it's like, if you walk into a bank in your robes, I think they're going to be a bit dubious. So anyway, that was my excuse. And so, just the environment sort of, I'm going to say overpowered me, but really my mind was too weak to withstand the environment is what it was. I didn't have enough renunciation. I hadn't meditated on this verse enough. I saw samsaric pleasures as the door to all pleasure, not suffering. So it was difficult to resist. so then in the end, I thought, well, I'm really not thinking like a monk. So, I'd rather be a good lay person than a bad monk. So then I went to see Lama Zopa, Rinpoche, and Lama Yeshe passed away at this time. He passed away in 84. In 86, I spoke to Lama Zopa Rinpoche and told him I was having difficulty, and he said, well, this was in India. I went from London to see him, and then he said, well, go back and try again, and if you still find it difficult, you can see the Geshe. We had a centre in London at that point, Jamyang Buddhist Centre, and there was a Geshe there, Geshe Wangchen. So after a month or so, I went to see him and said, look, I think I'd like to return my ordination. So, there's a respectful way that you can do it. So I did it that way. And, it was a 2 or 3 year struggle to come to that final decision, but that's what I did.
Nick, you had mentioned that of the first group of Western monks and nuns at Kopan, that only maybe 1 or 2 have maintained their ordination. I was wondering is that largely because of not being able to live in a monastery where you can really sort of focus on being a monk or a nun, that if you're just out in the world, for just about anybody, it's really quite difficult to maintain unless you're a really advanced practitioner?
Yeah, well, I think, there were some of us, there were, in my group who were ordained in 74, there were 10 of us, 4 monks and 6 nuns. The 2 of those nuns are still nuns. They'll be coming up in, 47 years, in January. One of the nuns disrobed briefly for about a year and then got ordained again. So she's a nun. But if you do that, you kind of start over. The way the monks sit in the monasteries, they sit in order of seniority. So, those who are fully ordained sit at the head of the line, then the novices sit according to the date of their ordination, So she was ordained in 74 and she kept it for, 15, 20 years, but then when she disrobed, and when you get ordained again after having disrobed, then you go back to the bottom of the line. But she's still a nun now. Of the monks, I was the first out of 4 to bite the dust. Then one of the others lasted at least 20 years, but he lived in the monastery in France, in the Lander Monastery, the FPMT monastery, that he eventually disrobed. And then one of the other monks studied at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics. He was a monk for Gareth Sparham, who translated this book. He was a monk for like 26 years, and then the other one was he mainly lived in Nepal, running a business for the FPMT out of Kathmandu, but he was always up at the monastery, and he lasted 25, 26 years. But eventually, can catch up with you. I think if we'd had a solid monastic situation. So a few of the monks went south to Sarah Monastery. Wasn't in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It wasn't that well developed. One of the monks, who was our Geshe Tsulga's second interpreter, yogi, Jampa Konchok, black African-American monk. He's still a monk. He was ordained in 75. No, but he went off. He was at Sarah. In fact, I think he lived next door to Geshe Tsulga for a number of years in the monastery, and he was his interpreter in 94, I think. Now he's doing his own thing in Atlanta. But those who, now there's quite a solid contingent of Western monks, FPMT monks at Sarah. And I think most of them seem pretty solid. I mean, I don't know if anyone knows Legden from Tsultrim, he was called before he became a monk. He lived at Kurukulla Center for a couple of years, 2008, 2010, around that time, before he went to Sarah. Gache, I don't know if you know Gache, Brian Reuter, he was a student at Tufts. He just translated the new book by Choden Rinpoche called Mastering Meditation, Wisdom, just published. He was at Kurukulla. His mother was on the board for a while, Kurukulla, Deb Colony. So they see, and now there's some Western monks who've become Geshes, FPMT, and they seem pretty solid in their ordination. So there's a lot of benefit to being able to stay in the monastery for many years and get out of the familiar surroundings that, you know, magnetically attract your delusions that are not too far below the surface. So, so the environment's important, you know, especially those of us who've been brought up in a very materialistic environment, you know, for 20 or 30 years before you kind of get involved in the Dharma. Then even from this life's habits are quite strong. So, but the problem is, you know, not studying, not meditating properly, and not developing renunciation, and not seeing samsaric pleasure as the door to all suffering. You know, you can read it, you can understand it, but that intellectual understanding isn't strong enough to reverse a lot of old habits in well, certainly in my case. You know. So even though I stopped being a monk, I was able still to, you know, I ran Wisdom Publications. I think we did good work in London, and then we came here in '89, and then I left in '96 to focus on the teachings of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and do this Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive that Lama Zopa Rinpoche suggested that we set up here. So, you know, so it hasn't been all bad. But it could have been better. So then the next verse, Lama Tsongkhapa says, led by this pure thought of seeing samsaric pleasures, the door to all suffering, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teachings is keeping the pratimoksha vows. These are the vows of individual liberation, you know, 5 lay vows, the 36 novice vows, the 200 or 300 vows of fully ordained monks and nuns. Pratimoksha is the individual liberation. Please bless me to accomplish this essential practice. So Kunalama says, Rinpoche says, with this next verse, we request blessings to succeed in the essential practice of keeping the vows of individual liberation. There are 7 different levels of pratimoksha ordination, such as the bhikshu and bhikshuni. That's gelong and gelongma in Tibetan, fully ordained monk, fully ordained nun. Keeping pratimoksha vows is the root of the teaching and the main cause of liberation. So remember, when we were talking about one of the definitions of the center of a religious country, the second of the 10 richnesses, being born in the center of a religious country. One of the definitions of the center of a religious country is where the lineage of the ordination still exists, where it's possible to take ordination as a monk or nun. Keeping the pratimoksha vows is the root of the teaching and the main cause of liberation. So, it's the main cause of liberation because the 3 higher trainings, conduct, concentration, wisdom, without pure morality, it's not possible to get single-pointed concentration. Without single-pointed concentration, can't meditate, can't realize emptiness. Can't realize emptiness, can't attain liberation. Supported by the pure thought of wanting to receive nirvana, liberation, we should keep our precepts with great remembrance, consciousness, and care. We shouldn't be like those practitioners who say that they're focusing on tantric practice and therefore don't need to concern themselves with sutra practice. So the pratimoksha vows are part of sutra practice. So I think we're all familiar with the difference between sutra and tantra. The 2 aspects of the Mahayana path. Mahayana Sutra and Mahayana Tantra.
Nick, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned the 3 higher trainings, you said without morality, you won't be able to achieve single-pointed concentration.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because an immoral brain or immoral mind is susceptible to more distractions and obstructions?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And if you do maintain a code of morality, then you would be able to maintain single-pointed concentration because you're practicing and following Dharma?
Well, it's the basis, I mean, whether we attain single-point concentration or not depends on many factors, but the bottom line is without pure moral conduct, it's virtually impossible to attain single-point concentration. There's just too many distractions, as you say, some of it's obvious and some of it's kind of insidious. We're just creating negative karma, and that sort of sucks us down, somehow.
Okay. Thank you.
We should reserve whatever pratimoksha vows we've taken with great care. First, it's necessary to generate the mind wanting to abandon samsara. So without renunciation of samsara, we cannot receive even hinayana nirvana, the liberation of the shravakayana and the pratyeka buddhayana, the hearers or the solitary realizers. Then, after generating the mind renouncing samsara, it's necessary to generate bodhicitta. Without bodhicitta, we cannot receive enlightenment. Therefore, it's necessary to practice bodhicitta. So that takes us into the next verse. So I think I'll finish there. So any questions on what we've done so far? More questions?
Nick, I'll ask maybe a quick question. I'm always curious on the wording where it says receive enlightenment.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was you know, you receive the teachings, but then you have to put them in practice.
Right. Yeah, maybe it's not like somebody's handing it out, you know. We have to do a lot of hard work, but that's the word Lama Zopa Rinpoche has always used. He translated this. I guess you do the work, you receive the reward. I don't know.
Would obtain be?
Yeah, I generally, people say attain or achieve, or I like to say attain, unless I'm reading receive. But yeah, I'm not sure actually what the Tibetan word is. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche has always said receiving enlightenment, receiving nirvana. But we know there's, when it comes to spiritual attainment, there's no free lunch. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody. So let's dedicate the merit. So, we generated bodhicitta at the beginning. We've been reading this teaching by Tsongkhapa and Kurukulla Lama Rinpoche, two great holy beings. So no question that we've created, a lot of merit. And so we should dedicate that merit to protect it from being destroyed by, anger, regret, or the other ones. Wrong views, and so forth. So I think, because of this merit, may I quickly reach enlightenment in order to enlighten all sentient beings. So you can visualize yourself, because of this merit, you transform yourself into Buddha, like in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha. And you send out light rays throughout all 10 directions infinitely, reaching each light ray reaches a sentient being and transforms that sentient being into an enlightened being. Then you think, no, now I've enlightened all sentient beings as I set out to do at the beginning. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Last one, next week. So if you have a chance, just you've got the link to read this teaching, think if you have any questions, and try and finish it off next week. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.